welcome back to Community Couch Time, a daily talk show where we talk about things that are important, things that are happening in our community, in our state, in this country, and internationally. Oftentimes, the topics that we discuss are ones that others aren't talking about. And the question is, why aren't we? Hello, and welcome to Community Couch Time. This is Lupe Cardona, and I'm very excited. I have a great friend here today, Dr. Roberto Cintli Rodriguez, also known as Dr. Cintli. You had said earlier, you really want your legacy to not just be that violence, right?
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you, because even though it's about violence, it's also like a huge triumph, and that is the work that you've been doing with the La Raza Killings Database Project. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how this is a triumph, like how this is a change from the last, 40 years of your work in this area?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, briefly, there's kind of like two stories regarding this. And the first one is simply like when I was a kid, that's during the walkouts, that was also a time of the UFW, and people were getting beaten in those days, and then in 70, Ruben Salazar got killed literally down the street from where I grew up. I grew up on Whittier Boulevard, and there's like two houses on Whittier, So Whittier's always been very impactful for me. So when Salazar was killed, we were all watching it on television. They were reporting live, KMEX, and they were saying, he's inside. So my brothers, they said, let's go. So we went, and we couldn't get literally in front of the Silver Dollar because the cops had blocked it off. But so that's how far my memory goes back, In other words, and in a way, that's why I became a writer. And so for me, and then of course in that era, that's when Santos Rodriguez got killed, 1973. And then you have a progression of other. As a writer, I wrote about the David Dominguez trial, 1978, out of San Gabriel Valley. That's where this cop kidnapped him, and then claimed the opposite, that the kid had kidnapped him. And the cop actually lost. That was like the first time ever I heard about that. And that was right before what happened to me. And that was 79. But 1 year before that was when they killed Jose Campos Torres. And that's Gil Scott Heron, kind of memorialized that, and, about that killing. So it's not like something new that has happened, Literally for me, 79, right? I got accused of trying to kill 4 cops. I went to a criminal trial, and I had 8 charges against me. And my attorney, Antonio, he won that case. That was, again, 79. The 7 years later, I had another attorney who dropped the case 2 days before, and Antonio picked up the case again. I was beyond mad, obviously, but I didn't have any time to get mad. We had 2 days to prepare, and so we won. Amazing, and it was Antonio again who picked up the case after all those years. So the point being, I have that history from way back. Right. That was even before Rodney King. So when Rodney King happened, the media, kind of like found out about something that people all over, Black, brown, Native peoples had always known. Right. And I really believe all of this is 1492 to the present. Because what? It's about dehumanization. What was the issue in 1492 in that era? Whether we were human or not, whether we had souls. And so to this day, I still believe that's exactly what's at play here. We are still seen as less than human. Asians also were part of that. In the old days, they kind of left them alone for a little while. But when this knucklehead, the ex-president, he kind of brought them back into the picture of that ugly hate. Because I was looking primarily at official violence, from law enforcement, which is the other aspect. And all of this comes together in that study, which I'll explain a little bit more. But like murdered and missing Indigenous women, the same phenomena happens to African American women and migrant women. Yeah. So part of this idea was like we have to look at all the violence surrounding this, because again, it's not police only. It's also migra. It's migra chasing vans, and the vans overturn, and 12 people get killed, 20 people get killed. Yeah. And that happens all the time because it's part of the policy. People get people die on the desert, in the desert, on based on policies that are intentional. We have those documents where they say we know they're going to die. That's the point, so that others will be discouraged from doing the same. So we've looked at all those different kinds of violences. The reason I didn't look at the issue of women before, because I thought like, well, yeah, I mean that's real, but we're talking about like we're paying the sheriffs, we're paying the police departments to keep the law, not to go around killing people or brutalizing. And so what happened is then I realized, like, because I started going to a number of forums, and the main complaint was that nobody ever investigates these cases. So it's kind of like, well, that's exactly what's with the issue of the police. The police kill or they brutalize, and then nobody investigates. That is, there's no independent investigation. Right. Simply the DA patting each other on the back and like, oh, well, the police said that the guy had a gun. Nowadays, you know what passes for guns nowadays? Cell phones. And that's definitely on the increase, where all the cop has to do is say they feared for their life.
Right.
And so if they say, well, I saw a shiny object, and of course it was a cell phone, it's like that's justified. So back in 2014, after having lived all this violence for all these years, I started hearing about the Michael Brown case and wrote about it, but I kept hearing the national dialogue, and it was literally just black and white. And I was like, guys, the journalism is still real bad. That is, that they still believe everything's black and white. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, we got to step forward and tell the world the reality of these three populations: indigenous, black, and brown. And some of us have a little bit of each of all three, or even more. And so to me, it's like, it's simply presenting a reality. And, it's kind of weird, but not one African American has ever told me like, hey, don't do what you're doing. But I've actually had Latinos tell me, that I was in the wrong, like you're out of your lane, or, like, why are you doing that? Like you're kind of like there's territory, like, hey, we're immigration, they're, police killings, etc. That's kind of how people spoke. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's part of our reality also. And that's why I always stress the three. It isn't like us only, Right. So now when we did the Raza database project, the lead demographer for us, because we had about 12 researchers plus like the lead demographer statistician. I mean, that guy did beyond anything we expected, because what he did is he put in all the data for all killings from the year 2000 to the present. So it isn't like Chicano only type of thing or black only. It's all killings, Right. And it actually proved, so we're almost done with the final study, but the preliminary pretty much gives us the big picture already. The only thing that happens with the final study is it gets uglier. We found 34,000 killings. Out of all that, I believe it was about close to 6,000 Raza killings. African Americans were about 7,500 or thereabout. Native peoples, it was about 500, but proportion is like the highest. Mm-hmm. Asians also were high. I had no idea Asians were being killed. Anyway, so once and what we found that one of the largest categories was the unknown, that people didn't know what people were, or right. even a name. So that's what these 12 researchers did. And I was one of them. So it's like they said, oh, this killing happened in Bakersfield, we don't know, et cetera, or this happened in South Central LA, or this happened in East LA. Mm-hmm. And so, if you know the area, it's kind of like, well, if it happened in East LA, it's probably a Chicano that got killed, Mexicano or Central American, right? Right. And so out of those 6,000, we've identified almost all of them. Not quite all, but almost. And it's ugly. It's uglier than we had thought. It is majority people of color and several thousand Chicanos or, Raza that have been killed on top of what we already had found. So, but part of what I was saying too is, we're couching it as like, so we know about all these killings, but there's something bigger than all this, mm-hmm. because this is what I was raised with. That is, it's like this violence is a system of control, you know. And think about like a dog in my era. We used to have like you get a newspaper and you hit the dog on the nose like if they're doing something wrong,
Right.
and you only need to do it once, you know, because all you have to do is pick up the paper and raise it, and the dog right away gets scared. And I looked at it like that's what they've done to us as a people, as a community. You know, they shoot enough people and they brutalize enough people so that we're under control. And in fact, people flip, and next thing you know, it's like, well, what was he doing out in his front yard at 5 a.m? Like, oh, you mean that it's a crime and that's punishable by death because somebody was out at 5 a.m? Part of what we looked at is it doesn't matter if they committed a crime or not. That is because if they commit a crime, that's what we have a judicial system for. You know, in other words, okay, charge them with a crime, and at court, if they're guilty, they go to prison or whatever. You know,
Mhm.
but in this case, it's like no, it's like judge, jury, executioner, and on and on.
Right.
So that was the whole point of this study, to not simply give numbers, but also that aspect of the control, but also that people can change. It's kind of like we change people's minds, because you see, one of the ideas, it would have been awesome if we could say, out of all those, you know, like 40% were justified, 60% were unjustified. We can't do that. You know why? Because we're doing the work of the government.
Yeah.
The government should be tracking every life, you know, because all life is sacred, you know.
Right.
But they don't. So it's up to the media, it's up to researchers and all that. And we're always going to be incomplete. Like, you know, a name like Garcia, Gonzalez, Torres, those names end up in the white category. You know, like if you read all the databases, like you read the Washington Post, you know, whatever the database means, you find people like that
Mhm.
in the white category. You know, and I remember when I first looked at it, like, what is a Torres doing in a white category? You know, I don't like the term Hispanic or Latino, but that's what researchers use, right?
Right.
So I figured, well, if that's what they're using, then that name doesn't belong there.
Right.
That name belongs in this other category. So that was the white category. And then after that, I said, well, I'm going to look at all the other categories. And sure enough, Torres, Garcia, etc.
Yeah.
In the unknown category. You know, in the unknown category, that's where it was the highest. You know, there was higher numbers there than even in the white category.
Right.
So that's when.
So I was just going to say, so it's really amazing work that you've done to uncover the unknown category, because it shows the reality of Raza people, right? And that we're actually being victimized by police brutality at higher rates than has been reported. But
Yeah.
this has also been a successful project, because can you share a little bit about how it got picked up by mainstream media?
Yeah.
Finally, that narrative is getting
Yeah. Well, based on what I was telling you, I had the hunch. You
Right.
call it a hunch, but I actually had evidence, you know? And so I started calling people, asking people all over the country, you know, kind of like, we need to do this, you know? I might be mistaken, but I think I talked to you about it too, like way back.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about 5-6 years ago, you
Yeah.
know, 2014, 7 years ago. And it's like, we need to do something because something's wrong. And I think based on that, and, you know, in all those years prior to our study, it was like all those killings were happening, but it was like a total, what we call it, a brownout. You know, there was a brownout total. And it was almost, and people would get mad. And I didn't even want to do this, you know, because, you know, as you know, I had post-traumatic stress, PTSD,
Yeah.
and traumatic brain injury, you know. And the last thing anybody with that kind of, you know, mental state needs is to be in that field, you know, in that, you know, it's not good and it's not healthy. But just like a lot of the people that I met, like that were survivors of torture and political violence, they would say, like, you know, who else can do this but ourselves? And we know it's going to be bad for us. You know, we know it's not good, but we have to do it. Nowadays, you have a combination of survivors, family members. But see, this is what's important. And one of my students, a PhD student, did this for my book. It's called Seguali violence, meaning Seguali violence, I might be pronouncing it incorrectly, but is the idea that it isn't one person that's affected, but rather circles of people's. In other words, you have the person itself. I mean, if they get killed, it's the person that got killed, right? And then you have family members, but then you also have neighbors, and you have schoolmates, you have teachers, you have, and so and think of it like a hate crime. You know why a hate crime has higher penalties? Because the theory is that when a hate crime is committed, it's giving out a signal to the rest of the community.
Yeah.
In other words, it's terrorizing a community. So to me, these police killings, this brutality is exactly that. It's sending out a message that, and the point is, it's not simply, again, like the family only that's affected, but our entire communities. And the unfortunate thing about this is we're literally talking 1492 to the present. We are still seen as less than human.
Right.
And it's all ugly. It's all negative. If I'm being honest, I wish I hadn't done this, in the sense that it's not healthy for me, but it had to be done. And what you mentioned or alluded to, that it absolutely got picked up by the national media. I had never seen this before. I've seen cases all over the country at a local level,
Yeah.
but in terms of like all of a sudden, everybody from the Washington Post, CNN, and if you look at our page, there's probably at least 30 national stories on there. And so it's almost like, I think it's like the media, they probably knew this was happening, but they didn't have the data themselves, and they jumped on it, and including in Spanish. And so they're all going to do a follow-up. And I see personally, I don't know. I don't know if it's like a story for a day or a story for a week, and then people forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
But because, people have done different things. And I often wonder myself, because people ask, like, well, what do we need to riot to get attention? Is that what we need to do? A lot, because people don't know what. And in one sense, I don't know. I don't understand it either myself. But what I can tell you is when the George trial, the Derek Chauvin trial was happening, the killer of Floyd, that's when that little kid, Adam Toledo, was killed right at the end of the trial. Yeah. And everybody covered that. And for the first time, I said, like, wow, it's like they're actually acknowledging, a Raza kid that was killed. And, we have that memory of Santos Rodriguez, 1973, Andy Lopez in 2013, in Santa Clara. And so there's those apparently those are the ones that have the greatest impact. Anyway, so when Toledo was killed, that was about 2 weeks before we released our preliminary study. And out of the blue, I think it was combined that everybody, like they wanted to know.
Yeah.
And they did. I don't think we, CNN is not only just a news source, just like the Washington Post. They're like a news service, kind of like the Associated Press.
Right.
So in other words, if they do a story, you could have 100 media cover it, because I remember seeing it in Apple News, and we never got interviewed by Apple or Yahoo, but they're everywhere, right?
Right.
So it has made that impact. And so the question becomes, okay, now that you have impact, what do you do? And see, one of the ideas, and again, and it isn't just me. I mean, our community has been dealing with this forever. And we've gone to the United Nations in the past. And I think a lot of us just felt like, well, we don't need the United Nations to tell us that the system is racist. We already know that. What is it that's missing?
Right.
You have the International Criminal Court of Justice. That's not a body that simply says, that makes proclamations. That's an actual criminal trial. 75 years after World War II, they're still hunting Nazis, And so we're not naive. That is, if we were to take a case to the UN, the criminal court, they might not even look at it or pay attention to it, but the record will be there. And maybe we have a change of consciousness in 10 years, 20 years, and the record will be there. All these killings happen, and it's total impunity.
Right.
We think of Border Patrol. Border Patrol is I think one case has been prosecuted. And of course, the cops won or the Migra won. And out of all the other hundreds of cases, zero. In other words, that's exactly how the law enforcement killings are, proportionate. That is, I can guarantee you that less than 5 cops are doing hard time right now out of those 34,000 killings. Killings are deaths,
Right.
And part of the reason I was saying that we don't really know if all of them are killings or deaths is precisely because the government is not doing that job, and they're not sifting out like justified versus unjustified. To them, everything's justified.
Right.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
It's hard work, and I think part of it isn't, again, simply that it's hard work. We have to be creating solutions, because
Right.
you have a lot of traumatized families, lots of traumatized survivors,
Right.
and traumatized communities. Some of that, I mean, one reaction for people is to just, they don't want nothing to do with that, especially those that have been traumatized, But obviously, you have people that step forward, and that's a good thing, But I think still, in the end, it's like we have to figure out what can we do.
Right.
We had a lot of support, and I think the idea should be to have congressional hearings, those international courts, just different things that can be done. So at a consciousness level. Last thing I'll say about this is that within the last month, we've had 2 apologies. One for the killing of Santos out of Dallas, Rodriguez.
Wow.
That was 73. Oh, no, yeah, Santos out of Dallas. And then in 78, the killing of Jose Campos, the chief of police there in Houston, he apologized. In other words, 73 and 78, we're talking like 50 years,
Yeah.
So in other words, these cases, and the trauma doesn't go away,
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
So, but I think, and I think a lot of times people think justice, there's no justice, people might get money, but that doesn't create justice.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's part of, for me, that's part of the work that I've always done, including the book, the Yolki book,
Right. Well,
yeah.
I want to say thank you for your, 50 plus years of journalism. Thank you for bringing all of this to light, and thank you for being an example of what it is that we need to do in order to ensure that change does happen. And so for those of you that are watching, I want to pose a community couch time journal question. The question is, why is it important for our communities like the Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian communities to have these counter narratives, right? To have these perspectives that challenge the dominant narrative. I want you to think about that. Think of some of the things that Dr. Cintli here has shared with us today. Think of things aside from that you've studied on your own. And really answer that, why are these counter narratives important for us in order to actually enact change?
And that takes us to the end of our interview with Dr. Roberto Cintli Rodriguez, scholar, Guerrero, professor emeritus. So grateful to have been able to have him on our show for 2 really powerful interviews. And so this takes us to our community couch time discussion question. Why is it important for us to have accurate data about the demographics that are victims of police brutality? I would like you to research a Raza victim of police brutality. What is their story? Share with us. We want to know. And in Lakesh,